My name is Maria Norman, and I'm an artist, filmmaker, drag performer, costume maker, priestess of nature, and independent researcher. I research subjects and persons from the art, dance, and entertainment world of the so-called La Belle Epoque, the time span roughly between the years 1871 and 1914. I will speak about the artist Toulouse-Lautrec and his chosen home, the very queer neighborhood of Montmartre, Paris. Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec was born in Albi in the south of France, into a noble family who kept things in the family by marrying their cousins. This had a negative impact on Toulouse-Lautrec's health. For example, he broke both of his legs in his teens, and thereafter they ceased to grow. So he became 151 centimeters, 5 feet tall. He showed an early passion for drawing and painting, and he went to art school in Paris. From around 1884, he lived and worked in Montmartre, more or less until his early death from alcoholism and syphilis in 1901. He was something of what we today would call a straight ally, even though contemporary terms are hard to apply correctly on historic persons, such as the term straight itself. Toulouse-Lautrec's allyship, as well as some of the other labels later in this lecture, are to be taken with a grain of salt. The terms are sometimes very ish, and sometimes it's actually even guessing. But many of the women I will present did indeed live a norm-breaking life, which included same-sex relations. And one thing is certain, the man himself was not a homosexual, and he was cisgendered. Homosexuality was actually legal in France at the time, but it was frowned upon and seen as unnatural. Quote, queer bar owners had an easier time in France than elsewhere because the French Revolution had decriminalized homosexual behavior, which had been a capital crime. French police continued to harass male homosexuals for public indecency and corruption of a minor under the age of 21. The police, however, were largely ignoring lesbian behavior within the confines of bars and brothels. They drew the line only at theater. End quote. So, legal, yet frowned upon. And in some circles, there was a kind of fascination with lesbianism, as it being a so-called part of modernity. But queers could be harassed and were harassed by police and the public. Paris, however, and Montmartre especially, was a place where communities were formed and safe-ish spaces existed. This is, if not the first, it's one of the first times Toulouse-Lautrec depicts lesbians. And you really need to look closely to find them. It's a couple dancing in the ballroom at Moulin de la Galette, the venue on the previous picture, which was an actual windmill turned dance hall, unlike the Moulin Rouge windmill, which was only decor. And here are some of Toulouse-Lautrec's depictions of love between women from the many brothels he frequented. These are some of his most famous depictions from the brothels, and they show the love between the female sex workers as tender, humane, and everyday-like. Toulouse-Lautrec did stay part-time in 2 or 3 brothels, one on Rue de Moulins and one on Rue de Amboise, and there's also a third one on Rue Joubert, which I must say is not in the Montmartre neighborhood, but in the quarters around the opera. He is said to have stayed for 2-3 days or 2-3 weeks at a time. Quote, They called him Monsieur Henri. The women were not used to consideration. To Lautrec, they were lovers. To others, they were merely objects. He part-time lived on the premises, shared their meals, added sweetmeats, pâtés, and fine wines to their menu, remembered the dates of their birthdays, and brought them presents. He played cards during leisure hours. He listened, drafted letters, and consoled them. He was admitted everywhere and at any moment. He entered their rooms and saw them washing and dressing, waking up, and from a chair he saw their lesbian gambols. End quote. Lautrec avoided people who were unused to his appearance, as it either evoked pity or amusement. In the brothels he had nothing of that sort to fear. Nothing could surprise the women. The social hierarchy had no importance there. He said, "They have good hearts. Good manners come from the heart. That's enough for me." And to be clear, he was their customer. He did pay for sex with them. So that was the same for him and their other clients. His images were sometimes raunchier and less open for interpretation as to what activity is actually going on between, well, these two women. The garlic emoji will be explained later. But in the case of such an image like this, these two friends, they could just be hugging each other, right? Some sources say that the brunette is Toulouse-Lautrec's favorite girl, Mireille. And these are photos of the women of either of the two brothels, the one on Rue de Moulin or the one on Rue d'Amboise. The brothel on Rue de Moulin was named La Fleur Blanche, the white flower, but it was also called Le Moulin. The brothels were often named after the streets that they were located on. And some of the names of the women from the brothels are actually known to us today, like Madame Baron and her daughter Paulette, Marcel, Roland, Gabrielle, and Lucie Bélanger, as well as Mademoiselle Pois-Vert, Elsa la Viennoise, and Mairie-Victoire Denis. And Mireille here, who's said to have been Toulouse-Lautrec's favorite. She used a great deal of makeup and peroxided her hair until it was egg yellow. This photo could possibly be of them, together in Toulouse-Lautrec's studio. One day Mireille came to his studio with a bunch of violets and gave them to him with a shy grace. He wasn't used to such attentions and was touched. Mireille is said to have left for Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1894. If this is true, then it isn't her on the previous photo. Mireille had been persuaded by a white slave trafficker and gone against Lautrec's advice. "None of those who go like that ever come back," said Lautrec sadly. And these are portraits commissioned by the madam of the house on Rue d'Amboise. They were placed as decorations in the salon, and Toulouse-Lautrec made them, and he had a friend help out, as well as a painter, like a house painter. He portrays them as individuals, and at the same time they become a sort of like representing preferences, like the hot brunette or the pale redhead. And yeah, what happened to the women? No one knows for sure. But there is an anecdote of how in 1946, two very old ladies are walking past the window of a second-hand dealer in Paris. He's bought the furniture from the Rue de Moulin brothel, or probably it was actually the brothel Le Chabanais. And in the window of the second-hand dealer, there is an elaborately decorated copper bathtub. The ladies stop, and they even go into the shop, and they view this bathtub for a long time. The owner asks, "Do you want to buy it?" "Oh no, we are merely looking. It brings back so many memories." They were two old workers from the brothel. True story or not? Hard to tell. But the bathtub was actually acquired by Salvador Dalí, who installed it in the Hotel Le Meurice. I'm not sure if it's still there. And it must be said that the majority of women working in the brothels did not reach old age. As they contracted venereal diseases, many were imprisoned, and many committed suicide. Toulouse-Lautrec's entire body of work show us recognizable historic persons, and we get to have a sort of a relation with them, like Jane Avril. Jane Avril was a solo dancer who performed on various cabaret scenes in Paris, such as the Moulin Rouge. For way more in-depth info on her, you can check my documentary on her. She was a witness to queer Montmartre life, and when she was older, she wrote about it in her memoir. So yeah, a witness, and she was likely one of the queer bohemian women of the area. She's pictured here, for example, with an unknown lady, Mademoiselle Fontaine. It's not known what relation they had. But Jane did have a close relation with English dancer May Milton. In French, they were described as inséparables, inseparables. And it was a code word meaning lovebirds or lovers. They lived together for a while on Montmartre Hill. May Milton was even nicknamed Miss Aussi, since Jane always answered invitations with "A Miss aussi? Can Miss also join?" They traveled together on vacation to family-like settings, such as visiting May's parents in London. May Belfort is said to have also gone with May Milton, and rumors say also with Jane Avril. Here it's very much trusting hearsay and rumors from over 120 years ago. May Belfort is known for singing risque songs containing innuendos while wearing baby-like clothing. Lyrics such as, "I've got a little cat, I'm very fond of that." And the word cat connoted the word pussy, which had double meaning back then as well. La Goulue, the glutton. She was one of the most famous Moulin Rouge dancers and a favorite of Toulouse-Lautrec. He depicted her many times over the years, from around 1885 to 1890s. She was very raunchy and gluttonous. Some said she was vulgar and that she was unashamed. Unashamed except for one thing, the relation with fellow dancer Môme Fromage. They lived together for a while, and when a fellow friend suggested that they were lovers, La Goulue protested loudly, and Môme Fromage admitted as loudly that they were indeed lovers. Loie Fuller was an American performer and choreographer of serpentine veil dances, also called butterfly dances, and she was a trailblazer of dance art. She was the partner of Gab Sorer, who was a choreographer, visual effects artist, and art promoter. Toulouse-Lautrec is said to have wanted to make a poster for Fuller, but she didn't want him to, because she preferred more conventional posters. He did capture her serpentine dance in a lithograph and in an oil painting. Emilienne de Alençon was an actress, dancer, and a famous courtesan, and she's portrayed here with Mairie-Victoire, a lesbian dancer and choreographer. And here's a drawing of her, which was turned into a lithographic print. Well, here I am in different kind of clothing, because technical problems, I don't know why, it just didn't save some of the clips with the recordings. This is Sarah Bernhardt, the great actress, the divine Sarah, who was also a courtesan and an eccentric. In Scandinavia, she is mostly remembered because there is a cake named after her. She is rumored to have been bisexual and have had a relation with artist Louise Abema. Cha-U-Kao is a person who is almost forgotten. Her actual name is, as of present, unknown. She was a lesbian, and even though we have very few testimonies from the women themselves, depictions of her do tell that she was one of the followers of Sappho. Cha-U-Kao performed at the Moulin Rouge as a clown or clowness in a male role. Her nickname is said to be from the words Chahoot plus chaos. Chahoot was the name of the can-can of its time. In this painting from Moulin de la Galette, we see her in high lesbian fashion, hatless, wearing an elegant black jacket and a black skirt. And I have actually shown images of her earlier in the brothel painting The Kiss. You can see the detail here that I have included. But that does actually not mean that she worked there in the brothel, as Toulouse-Lautrec could make paintings where he would put his friends as, well, pimps, for example, without that being the case. Cha-U-Kao's partner is said to have been Gabriel the dancer, who was portrayed by Toulouse-Lautrec. In the left image, Gabrielle looks conventional, but her hair is cut short, which connotes her same-sex affections. And the image in the middle shows her in clothes which marks that she prefers ladies. Gabrielle is one of the many persons who is practically unknown to us, but she appears in some of the paintings from the brothels. Again, this does not mean necessarily that she was someone who worked there, but she did indeed do sex work. Some sources say that this is a depiction of Cha-U-Kao while off duty, perhaps dancing with her partner Gabrielle. They are waltzing at the Moulin Rouge, which was a common sight at the venue, two ladies dancing together. Jane Avril is in the background with the red jacket, and May Milton is said to be the woman in the far back, on the right. This is the same couple from the painting from Moulin Rouge, possibly Cha-U-Kao and Gabrielle. And here's a depiction of another same-sex couple at a table somewhere. The only work which could be read as a kind of criticism of lesbianism is this lithograph, Eros Vané. Yet this is an illustration for the song version of Maurice Donné's monologue in verse, which laments how the god Eros, also known as Cupid, you know, the little baby who shoots love arrows at people, that he is obliged to play an uncongenial role in promoting the sterile, fugitive loves of women. So the meaning is that Eros/Cupid's role is to make people procreate, and thus his attempts with the lesbians are making him bruised and broken, or that they've beaten him up. Anyway, their lovemaking doesn't produce any babies. The couple portrayed is perhaps May Milton, and possibly the singer Yvette Guibert. And what about gay men? They were not interesting to Toulouse-Lautrec, because he himself loved women, and he may have depicted closeted gay men, perhaps some of the actors from the theatre, but is not interested in male love or openly gay bi men per se, except Oscar Wilde. They had likely met on some of Wilde's frequent visits to Paris, and Toulouse-Lautrec went to London in 1895 and met up with him after the first hearing, when Wilde had been accused of sodomy by his lover's father. Toulouse-Lautrec was an Anglophile, by the way. He was part of a kind of subculture which very much enjoyed English things, like literature and fashion. He spoke English himself quite well. Toulouse-Lautrec wanted to portray Wilde, and, well, he did so, but Wilde didn't sit for him. Toulouse-Lautrec did his depictions of Wilde from memory, and this drawing was published in the magazine Revue Blanche, together with an article by Paul Adam, which was in defense of homosexuality, and it highlighted the hypocrisy of Wilde's critics. Quote, "The moralists of Paris will not hesitate to censure the author of Salome, Oscar Wilde, for having seduced Lord Douglas, whereas they would have commended him and envied him if it had been a Lady Douglas who had yielded his desires." End quote. Sources say different things regarding Toulouse-Lautrec's feelings on Wilde as a person. Some say he admired him greatly. Others that he found him pompous, that he disliked his aesthetic posing and found him pretentious. And some sources state that Toulouse-Lautrec liked and respected Wilde's wit and his writing. Matter of fact is that he did support him. Toulouse-Lautrec depicted Wilde in the crowd of persons looking at La Goule's new venture, a booth where she performed Moorish/Arabic style dances. He's the fellow in the top hat. And other persons in the crowd are dancer Jane Avril in black, then the anarchist Félix Fénéon on the far right, and Edith Piaf's grandmother, Emma Said Ben Mohammed, is seen playing the tambourine. After Wilde was released from jail, he lived in Paris until his death in 1900. He used the pseudonym Sebastian Melmoth. Catalan artist Ricard Opisso depicts Wilde and Toulouse-Lautrec together, as they did meet up occasionally. Gay bars existed, and one of the first was called Maurice's Bar. It opened in 1906 in Montmartre. It served drinks and meals and had an upstairs bedroom with separate entrance, and it was used by sex workers of both sexes. It had entertainment, raunchy for its day, like an older woman performing a striptease while being sprayed with seltzer water. Or persons who probably was what we today call drag queens or cross-dressers, who were often arrested. Jane Avril writes in her memoirs of how beautiful young men adorned themselves with the names of famous women. One was named Bobette, had bleached hair and put on makeup. Another took the name d'Alençon from the famous courtesan, just like another one who named himself Pougy. One of them looked like her and called himself Jane Avril. Lesbian restaurants originated in a service called table d'hôte, a meal service for a regular clientele provided by a hostess. And when the hostess in question was a lesbian and opened up her business to the public, equals lesbian restaurants. Madame Palmyre, for example, whose bar La Souris, the Mouse, was a brasserie, a cheap restaurant and a bar. And in this bar, there were lots of smoking, some drugs, particularly morphine and ether, endless card games, entertainment in the form of a, quote, a tall black person with a nasal voice singing and dancing on a table to the sound of a banjo, end quote. Some people sported garish dresses and hats, others strictly tailored jackets with collar and tie. La Souris was not advertised, and there was no sign notifying that this was a bar. Toulouse-Lautrec was a regular, and he even reserved the place for a multi-course dinner on 31st of July, 1897. He made a menu card featuring Palmyre's dog, Bouboule. Some weeks prior to this, two men had entered the bar and went violent, striking and kicking several ladies. The police report gives the bar as a meeting point for lesbians, that the men were part of a band of pimps. The assaulted women were registered sex workers and kept women. And the report said that the bar is open until 2 p.m. and is frequented by aging courtesans, lesbians, and were off limits to the neighborhood pimps. The men were sentenced, and one was fined, and the other served 1 month in prison. Madame Amandine, whose real name was Augustine Bissier. She was a courtesan nearing the end of her career, and from 1882 she was a restaurant owner. Some sources states that this is the courtesan actress Emilienne de Alençon who is accompanying her. Madame Amandine, she had two cafes on Place Blanche up till 1895, and Chez Amandine around the year 1895 to 1902. Quote, Madame Armande was a one-eyed ex-prostitute who had last done with men. She reigned at her counter, sat back, straight-backed and glum, and when her women customers entered the establishment, they went to embrace her and receive a kiss of welcome before sitting down. End quote. Jane Avril describes her as looking more like an old magistrate than a woman, in her high collar. And Lautrec was one of few men to frequent her bars, and Madame Armande showed him a maternal affection. He nicknamed her Gambetta, after the French politician who had one eye, just like Armande. The bar Le Honnêton was a lesbian bar on Place Pigalle, and the name means a type of beetle, the June bug. And this was actually advertised in the commercial directory, and it was run by a Mademoiselle Salé, and was a kind of competition place to La Souris. And all of these mentioned bars catered to queers of all genders and sexualities, but some would be more frequented by lesbians, for example. André Philippe, his real name was Suzanne Bourget, or Bauget. And yeah, she's almost forgotten, and one wonders how many other almost forgotten queer pioneers there actually are. This person wasn't portrayed by Toulouse-Lautrec, but it's much thanks to his friend and model Jane Avril and her 1933 memoir plus newspaper articles in archives that make us know anything at all about her. She owned the bar Le Scarabée, the Scarab, and it opened around the year 1900. And yeah, just like La Souris, it was owned by André Philippe and her partner, Marie-Augustine Dubois. Its clientele were lesbians, gay men, and men who wore makeup and ladies' clothing. André Philippe was the daughter of a theatre director and had been a child star who did trouser roles. meaning male roles. She expressed a great regret at not being a boy. Jane Avril wrote that Philip lived in an all-female household, and Avril describes how she one time went to the Scarab to see a show, and the place had been raided by the police the day before. André Philippe was laying sick in a bed and tried to put up the show with the few non-broken pieces of furniture still present. Jane Avril described it as a sad spectacle. And this drawing is, as far as I know, the only image of Philip that exists. And then there are other artists from Toulouse-Lautrec's era who did depict lesbians or bi women, like the young Picasso, who was heavily influenced by Toulouse-Lautrec. Here he shows two women cuddling at the legendary Moulin de la Galette. This is a symbolist painting by Granier, and it shows female love as mysterious, dreamy, and serene. There was also a whole deal of satire, like in this Mademoiselle Saturne, the Saturn Misses. Saturn was the fertility god. And this was used as the cover illustration for an exposé on lesbian Paris. Above the entrance to the bar, which likely is the bar La Souris, there's garlic. The term garlic eaters was French vulgar slang for lesbian sex. Jean-Louis Forain. It says, without women, what would we have left? A sort of satire, I suppose, is the meaning of this. This illustration is by Villette, the architect and designer of the Moulin Rouge. The picture shows how a femme feels up a woman dressed in a more masculine style, a style known for its connection to bicycles. It's described in Danish journalist Henrik Kavling's book on Paris from 1900. Quote, "Some of the cocottes are dressed in bicycling attire, although they of course do not own a bicycle. The bicycle cocotte is treated like a man by the other women. They dance with her and court her, and close to the Moulin Rouge, they have their secret restaurants." End quote. And here is a depiction of dancing women at the Moulin Rouge by Tony Minnaert. Kees van Dongen, we're more leaning into the 20s with this one on the left, more like Cubism, yeah, in Fauvism times. But yeah, still calling it Two Friends, and a kind of hiding in plain sight title, which was also used by Toulouse-Lautrec. Gustav-Adolf Mossa depicts Sappho as a contemporary lady. And yeah, in this era, it's very popular to speak of and refer to things from antiquity, such as sapphic love, meaning lesbianism, or terpsichorean art, meaning dance, from terpsichore, the muse of dance, or priestesses of Cythera, meaning sex workers, as Cyprus is the land or island of Aphrodite, the love goddess. So there can be sentences such as, "Many of the Cythera priestesses officiated in Lesbos." The meaning is that many of the sex worker women were lesbians. And yeah, this is someone who's called themselves Madame Sappho, the brunette, and the blonde is Colette. And yeah, this image is a great segue into Some women who were documented lesbians or bisexuals in or around Toulouse-Lautrec's time. The reclining woman is American Natalie Clifford Barney, photographed in 1900. The first time I saw this image, I thought it was from the 1970s with like an old filter or edit. She looks so modern. Barney was a writer, and she was from a wealthy family she held salons in her Parisian home for over 60 years. From early age, she knew that she was a lesbian, and she lived openly. She had a relation with poet René Vivienne, and they learned Greek together to be able to read Sappho in its original language. And Barney had a relation with writer Colette, a shorter relation around the year 1906. And she had a relation with Liane de Pougy, a famous courtesan and writer. And she was courted by Barney. She appeared in a page costume as Sappho's Page of Love. De Pougy wrote the book Idylle Sapphique, in English, A Woman's Affair, and a book based on their relation. And all of these women frequented the above-mentioned bars La Souris and Hanneton. Colette and Mathilde Missy de Morny, also nicknamed Max and Ussim. Missy was a niece of Napoleon III, who defied social conventions by dressing in male clothing and embracing masculinity as an identity. Missy may or may not have been a trans man, and it's difficult to know what pronoun Missy would have preferred. Missy dressed in male clothes, such as pants, which was actually not allowed for women unless you had a permit. And much lesbianism was overlooked, unless it was, so to speak, out in the open. Like when Colette and Missy appeared together in Rêve d'Égypte at Moulin Rouge on the 3rd of January 1907. The Moulin Rouge had been turned into a theatre in around 1903, yet in Toulouse-Lautrec's time it was a ballroom. The plot of Rêve d'Égypte concerned an Egyptologist, a man, who finds a mummy. The mummy comes alive, she dances, and they kiss. Statements on what exactly happened thereafter differ, but the shared kiss on stage was a step too far. It may have caused a riot, which went from inside the Moulin Rouge and out to the street. Or they hassled through the performance, despite the boos and the objects that were thrown at them. Like some people had come to target, especially Missy, for being a cross-dressing lesbian. And with this kiss as the crescendo. The police, they drew the line for accepting lesbianism at the theatre, as I mentioned in the beginning. And since this was out in the open, the police shut down the performance, and it was only performed once at the Moulin Rouge. It was performed 2 months later in Nice. This time no riot, but also not another performance, ever. That was all I had on this subject, although I'm sure there's always more to say and other sources to consult. I did my best to get all the facts right and to tell an interesting story. And I'm sure that 250 years in the future, if humans still exist and use technology, there will still be technical problems. Et malheureusement, je ne parle pas français. Je suis désolée.